Happy Halloween, everyone! Upon deciding on what to do for this Halloween special, I realized I forgot yet another archetype I wanted to review, which was short and reasonable. And yeah, this rounds up the archetype analysis to 140, so yeah, I'm glad. So yeah, this is finally the final archetype I'm gonna be reviewing for quite some times. Anyway, spooky, scary skeletons, skull servants used by Yugi Moto. I mean, skull servants were actually used by many various duelists and, well, cards which are part of the archetype. Because yeah, this is a classic archetype in that terms, and yeah, the first monster originates from Yugi Moto, so yeah, I'm treating him as a Yugi archetype. So yeah, we start off with the titular Skull Servant, level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. Has no effects, of course. But yeah, this is a normal monster you actually run a 3 of, because we'll get to it in a second. But before we get to that, the main meat and potatoes of the archetype, we have quite a few normal monsters we'll get rid of now. First up, we have Wandering Doom, which is a 1999 OCG exclusive and completely irrelevant. And then we have the somewhat more relevant in massive quotes here, Battle Warrior and Dissolve Rock, whose only use is as fusion materials for two fusion monsters which require Skull Servant as one of the materials. First one being Zombie Warrior and the other one being Flame Ghost. Zombie Warrior requires Battle Warrior and Flame Ghost requires Dissolve Rock. If you're not being funny with instant fusion, you just don't run these because, well, they're pretty terrible. Alright, now going on to the main potatoes. First up, we have their first effect monster, that being King of the Skull Servants. He's a level 1 with undetermined attack and 0 defense, and the original attack of this card is the combined number of King of the Skull Servants and a Skull Servant in your graveyard times 1000. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can banish one other King of the Skull Servants or one Skull Servant from your graveyard and special summon this card. Okay, I'm gonna cut straight to the chase here and say that this is a monster special summonable by 1/1, which is also a 17,000 plus attack beatstick. I'm not kidding. Yeah, basically this thing revolves around having monsters whose names are treated as Skull Servant, and if you run three of each at all times, this thing is probably gonna have 17,000 at most, if not more, when combined with some other cards which boost attacks, and not to mention it has a pretty decent protection effect when it gets destroyed by battle. So yeah, he basically loses 1000 attack upon each revival, but you can also recycle cards back into your graveyard in order to make this thing into an even more formidable beast. This was genuinely a kick-ass card back in the day when it usually hit the field with 5000 or 6000 attack each turn you summoned it. So yeah, this is a 3-off staple in any build, and yeah, this is also their final boss monster in that regard. But like I said, there are multiple monsters who has effect when they're in the graveyard. They're treated as Skull Servants, so let's get rid of them. I mean, let's take a look at them, shall we? First off, we have White Mare, their final level 1 with same stats as the original Skull Servant, and while it is in the graveyard, this card's name is treated as Skull Servant. You can discard this card to activate one of the following effects. Select one of your removed from play Skull Servant or White Mare and return it to the graveyard, or select one of your removed from play Lady in White or King of the Skull Servants and special summon it. Yeah, this is basically a 3-off staple because, well, first off, it's a Skull Servant while in the graveyard. Then it has a discard effect, which again sets up the graveyard and allows you to, in the form of an archetype, recover stuff from the graveyard, which are most likely banished by King of the Skull Servants in order to revive himself. Or you can straight up special summon King of the Skull Servants or Lady in White, which we'll get into in a second. But yeah, you're most likely gonna be summoning King of the Skull Servants because, yeah, I would have actually loved it a bit more if you could actually return Lady in White into the graveyard, because she also has a has an effect which basically makes her a Skull Servant, so yeah. And their final level 1 is White Prince, with 0 attack and defense, and if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can send 1 Skull Servant and 1 Lady in White from your hand and or deck to the graveyard. You can banish 2 Skull Servants and discard from your graveyard to special summon 1 King of the Skull Servants from your deck. This card's name becomes Skull Servant while it is in your graveyard. An archetypal way to summon King of the Skull Servants is pretty admirable, since 1-for-1 is limited. But the sheer amount of generic zombie support basically makes this guy's banish effect obsolete, since you're essentially getting rid of 3000 attack for King of the Skull Servants in order to bring it out. But the option is still there, so I guess it works. You run this guy at 3 because of the graveyard effect that basically makes him a Skull Servant. First up, we have their level first off from on their level 3 lineup is the aforementioned the Lady in White. This is a level 3 with 0 attack and 2200 defense, and face-up level 3 or lower zombie-type monsters on the field except Lady in White cannot be destroyed by battle and are unaffected by spell or trap cards, and has the graveyard effect that it becomes a Skull Servant while in the graveyard. This is actually a pretty fantastic card, no question about it. While it's on the field, it basically makes the King of the Skull Servants an indestructible engine of destruction, sort of. He's still prone to kaiju baiting. And not to mention that that for a level 3 it has a gargantuan 2200 attack, which is an absolutely fine stat line in my opinion. So yeah, this is an absolute staple no matter the build. Ratios depend on you though. Next up we have their final monster, that being a recent piece of support, White Princess. Another level 3, this one has 1600 attack and 0 defense, and has the Skull Servant graveyard effect, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can send 1 White Prince from your deck to the graveyard. During either player's turn, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard. All monsters currently on the field lose attack and defense equal to their own level or rank times 300 until the end of this turn. The second effect might sound a bit odd or specific, but it's basically the best use of this card other than the graveyard effect, because when it is normal special summoned, you get a Foolish Burial which sends a White Prince to the graveyard, which is a bit too specific, since, well, I would have actually loved it if it included Skull Servants and Whitemare, for example. Then I would have called it a much better card, and yeah, it would be a much harder staple then. But the second effect and the graveyard effect more than make up for it, since you can basically send this card to the graveyard, weaken the opponent's monster substantially, so King of the Skull Servants can beat them even harder. And not to mention that this thing also happens to be a Skull Servant while in the graveyard, so another 1000 attack for our Lord King. And their final card is the normal spell card Tri-White. Target 3 level 2 or lower normal monsters in your graveyard and special summon them. This is actually somewhat of a prototype or archetypal soul charge. Well, somewhat, because this thing is actually very generic, since it targets any level 2 or lower normal monsters in your graveyard and allows them to special summon it. However, that leads to the issue that you need to specifically revive 3 monsters, not 3 or less. Just specifically 3 monsters with those characteristics. But yeah, but it is really played in Skull Servant, since you can revive 3 of them, or, well, the Wandering Doom if you plan to run it, and basically go into a Link 3 monster maybe, because it doesn't affect your the rest of your summons per turn. So yeah, 2 or 3 of these are usually fine. 3 can be a bit too cloggy, but 2 is usually perfectly fine. It's also played in Ojamas because of the characteristics of the revival. So yeah. Now for the grades. In terms of consistency, the absolute sheer amount of zombie type support, along with their own perfectly serviceable consistency, is enough for me to give them a 3 out of 3. Power only exists in form of King of the Skull Servants, which usually is plenty to hit, and other power outputs are basically depend on what kind of extra deck toolboxes you have. But still, having an archetypal monster which can be special summoned by 1 for 1, which can have 17,000 attack or more, is such an admirable trait for an archetype that I absolutely have to give him at least a 2 out of 3. So that's the grade I'll be giving, since it's not a perfect 3 out of 3, because if you choose to build a deck which does not revolve around King of the Skull Servants most of the time, which basically revolves in the usage of the graveyard and your extra deck toolbox, then yeah, it's not the best. Comeback ability usually depends on how fast you can bring back or bring out King of the Skull Servants, which can be a bit of a hindrance sometimes, so I'm gonna give him a 2 out of 3 here, since the archetype does have a fair share of comeback tools along with the generic zombie support, but still it can be a bit it can get a bit heated if you shut down the graveyard with Necrovalley or something. Protection gets admirable 2 out of 3 just because Lady in White is a thing, and the fact that a level 3 monster with mediocre stats, if we consider the attack values, has such a strong protection effect for a boss monster who already has a ridiculous amount of attack points. So yeah. And as for the versatility, well, this guy actually deserves a 3 out of 3 because they actually have a proud ownership of a deck which has a 100% win percentage. So yeah, it's obligated for me to give him a 3 out of 3 here. So yeah, that was a little Halloween special and another archetype done. And yeah, now we can rest in peace. Ha ha, humor from Archetype Analysis for a bit. So thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. And as usual, I'll upload the next video whenever I can, whenever that will be. See you all, have a good day, and peace.